Central Park, a vibrant hub of life, seemed to radiate with serenity one sunny morning. The gentle rustling of leaves, the playful chirps of birds, and the distant chatter of families filled the air. A calm breeze swept through the park, where joggers, dog walkers, and cyclists shared the space in harmony. Among the crowd was Evelyn Carter, a high-ranking female officer in the army. Today, however, she was not in her military uniform, but rather in simple athletic wear, a pair of leggings, and a comfortable t-shirt. No one could guess she was one of the highest-ranking women in the armed forces. With her healthy brown skin and confident posture, Evelyn blended into the crowd, just another face in the park. Taking a moment to hydrate, she paused by a water fountain. Her piercing eyes scanned the surroundings. Despite the peaceful atmosphere, Evelyn remained vigilant. Years of military training had taught her to be aware of her environment at all times. It was then that her sharp ears caught the sound of a sob, a faint cry from nearby. Evelyn's gaze shifted to a small bench not far from her, where she noticed a toddler, no older than 3, sitting on the ground. His tiny body trembled as he clutched a worn teddy bear. His face was streaked with tears, eyes wide with fear. Evelyn looked around quickly, searching for an adult who might be the boy's parent, but the park was teeming with strangers, and no one seemed to notice the child's distress. The boy's fear was palpable. Evelyn couldn't just walk away. She approached him slowly, her voice soft but firm. "Hey there, little one," she said, lowering herself to sit beside him at his eye level. "Are you lost?" The boy's trembling hands gripped the teddy bear tighter, and he took a small step back. His tearful eyes met hers, full of confusion and uncertainty. Evelyn, noticing his fear, kept her voice as gentle as possible. "I won't hurt you. My name's Evelyn, and I'm here to help," she reassured him, offering a small smile. The boy glanced up at her, still shaking. After a brief pause, he whispered, "I can't see Mom. Where is Mom?" Evelyn smiled warmly, nodding reassuringly. "It's okay, sweetheart. Your mum is probably looking for you right now, and I'm here to help you find her. Let's stick together until we find her, all right?" The boy hesitated but finally nodded, his grip on the teddy bear loosening just a little. Evelyn stood up and held out her hand, a symbol of trust. "Come on, let's go find her together." Unbeknownst to her, a few minutes later, this simple moment of kindness would be caught in a whirlwind of chaos, a story of suspicion, unfair accusations, and the twists of fate that come when people are misjudged. Evelyn continued walking slowly through the park, holding Max's small hand. His tiny fingers gripped her tightly as they moved together toward the security area. Evelyn's presence was calm, her voice soothing as she tried to comfort the boy. "Do you like toys, Max?" she asked gently, trying to distract him from the worry that seemed to consume him. Max's eyes darted nervously, still scanning the faces around them, looking for someone he recognized. He muttered softly, "I like cars, and my sister. She likes dolls." Evelyn smiled, her tone light and warm. "That's nice. I bet your sister is missing you." Max nodded faintly, still holding the teddy bear as if it were his lifeline. He gave short answers, his mind clearly focused elsewhere, still searching for any sign of his mother. What neither Evelyn nor Max knew, however, was that they were being watched. A few feet away, Officer Jason Miller, a patrolman, had just entered the park. He had been trained to observe and evaluate situations, but today his mind was clouded with suspicion. The sight of Evelyn holding Max's hand didn't sit right with him. The scene felt off, and something about it didn't add up. "What's going on here?" Jason muttered to himself, narrowing his eyes as his gaze followed them. His instincts kicked in, and his hand hovered near the walkie-talkie on his belt, ready to make a call if necessary. In his mind, this wasn't a simple case of helping a lost child. Evelyn's calm, confident demeanor, paired with the fact that she wasn't, with a child of her own, triggered his suspicions. The boy was clutching a teddy bear, his face still streaked with tears. But the casual way Evelyn held his hand only seemed suspicious to Jason. She was dressed in a sports outfit, with tan skin that didn't fit the image he'd constructed, in his mind of a caring adult. Without more context, everything pointed towards something darker in Jason's eyes. Evelyn, unaware of Jason's growing suspicion, continued her mission to reunite Max with his mother. She spoke kindly to him, her gentle words flowing easily as she reassured him. "We're almost there, Max. Just a little further, okay?" But just as they neared the path that led to the security station, a harsh voice rang out, cutting through the peaceful atmosphere of the park. "Stop right there!" Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She turned quickly, startled, to find Officer Jason Miller approaching. His hand was resting on the holster at his waist, his eyes sharp and cold, staring right at her. "What's going on here?" Jason demanded, his voice stern, accusatory. Evelyn's brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm just helping this boy. He's lost, and I'm taking him to the security area," she explained calmly, trying to defuse the situation. But Jason was already on edge, his mind racing. "Is this child yours?" he asked, his gaze never leaving her. "No, but Evelyn began. But Jason interrupted her, his voice louder and more forceful. "If it's not your child, you have no right to touch him. Take your hands off him immediately." Max, startled by the harshness in Jason's voice, began sobbing uncontrollably, clutching his teddy bear tighter, his face crumpling in fear. Evelyn's frustration grew, her protective instincts flaring up. "Officer, you're scaring the boy," Evelyn said firmly, but her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. "I told you, I'm just helping him." Jason's expression twisted into a smug, knowing smirk. His eyes never left Evelyn as he took a step closer. "I don't know who you are, or what you're doing, but this doesn't look right," he said with a cold edge, his voice laced with suspicion. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm about to break. Jason's voice echoed across the park, sharp and commanding. "I don't let anyone kidnap children on my property," Jason snapped. His eyes never left Evelyn as he took another step closer. "Now step aside, or I'll have to resort to drastic measures." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, but she fought to remain composed. She needed to stay calm for Max's sake. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking. "I am Colonel Evelyn Carter, U.S. Army," she said, her voice firm yet calm. "I am not a kidnapper. If you don't believe me, call park security or check my identity." But to Jason, Evelyn's words were nothing more than an elaborate fabrication. His mind, clouded by prejudice, couldn't fathom the idea that a woman of color dressed in plain clothes could possibly be a high-ranking officer. He refused to believe it. "I don't care who you call yourself," Jason sneered. "Now put your hands on your head and get on your knees." Max's sobs grew louder as he clung to Evelyn, his tiny body trembling in fear. He couldn't understand what was happening, only that the kind woman who had helped him was now being threatened by another adult. The confusion in his eyes was heartbreaking, and Evelyn's protective instincts kicked in. She looked down at Max, then back at Jason, her heart breaking for the boy. "I did nothing wrong," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the growing anger within her. "I'm just trying to help him." But Jason's eyes remained cold, judgmental, and unyielding. His prejudices were clouding his judgment, and the misunderstanding was quickly escalating into something much worse. The peaceful park, once filled with the laughter of children and the rustle of leaves, now felt suffocating. All eyes turned toward Evelyn and Jason as the tension between them grew. The quiet was shattered by Jason's shout, and soon a small crowd began to form, watching the confrontation unfold. A few bystanders had taken out their phones, already recording the scene for all to see. Jason's voice rang out again, louder and more commanding. "For the last time, I order you to kneel and put your hands on your head." His words were filled with authority, but underneath them, there was also a growing sense of frustration. His hand hovered dangerously near the holster of his gun, as if he were waiting for any reason to act. Evelyn's mind raced, her thoughts swirling in a chaotic mix of anger, disbelief, and concern for Max. She could feel her pride being hurt, but more than that, she was terrified for the little boy who was still sobbing uncontrollably, clutching his teddy bear as if it were his only source of comfort. He was shaking in her arms, his small frame trembling with fear. Evelyn's voice remained calm, but there was an undeniable firmness in her words. "Listen, you're losing your cool," she said, her eyes never leaving Jason's. "I'm not a threat. I told you, I'm Colonel Evelyn Carter. This boy is lost, and I'm just trying to help him. Please check my identity before you act." Jason's face reddened with anger. "Don't disobey me," he roared. "I don't need your explanations. Now do as I say, or you will suffer the consequences." The situation quickly spiraled out of control. The onlookers murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, while others filmed the entire scene on their phones. The tension was palpable, and Evelyn could feel the weight of the eyes on her, but she couldn't back down now, not when Max needed her the most. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the situation palpable. The crowd had started to murmur, some shouting in protest, trying to reason with the officer. "Don't do anything stupid. She's just helping the boy," a voice cried out from the crowd. But Jason wasn't listening. His mind was clouded with suspicion, and his prejudices were taking over. Evelyn's calm confidence only seemed to fuel his paranoia. He was now like a madman, consumed by the need to assert his authority, regardless of the truth. "Step aside. Kneel down," Jason shouted again, his voice rising with the pressure of the moment. "This is your final warning." Evelyn stood her ground, her voice louder now, unwavering. "I will not kneel," she said firmly, her eyes locking onto Jason's. "I have done nothing wrong, and I will not let you insult me or endanger this child." Jason's hand tightened around the grip of his gun. His face was twisted with anger, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and rage. Without hesitation, he pointed the gun directly at Evelyn, his finger trembling near the trigger. "This is your last chance," Jason shouted, his voice shaking with excitement and fury. The crowd gasped collectively. Some shouted in protest, but none dared intervene. They were trapped in a dangerous moment, paralyzed by fear, too afraid to act. Evelyn could feel the weight of the gun's barrel aimed at her. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. She could hear the terrified sobs of Max beside her, still clutching her hand, still unaware of the danger that surrounded them. She didn't flinch. Her voice was calm but laced with warning. "You're making a grave mistake," she said, her eyes fixed on Jason's. "I'm a military officer. I've spent my life protecting this country, and now I'm being threatened because of the color of my skin. You should think twice before doing something you'll regret." Her words were like a spark in dry tinder, and Jason, filled with a mix of anger and prejudice, saw them as a challenge. His resolve hardened, and in that split second, when Evelyn moved slightly to reassure Max, Jason misunderstood her gesture. Before Evelyn could react, Jason's finger pulled the trigger. Bang! The deafening gunshot rang out, slicing through the tense silence like a knife. Evelyn gasped as the bullet tore into her leg, and she collapsed to the ground, clutching her right thigh. Blood began to pool around her, staining the earth beneath her. Max screamed, his voice shrill and panicked. "Someone help! She's been shot!" Someone in the crowd shouted, frantic. The sound of sirens, both police and ambulance, could be heard wailing in the distance, but everything around Evelyn seemed to blur. Pain coursed through her body, but her mind was still sharp. Her eyes remained fierce, filled with rage and disbelief. Jason stood frozen, his hand still gripping the gun, his wide eyes staring at Evelyn in horror. He had acted on impulse, driven by his own biases, and now he had crossed a line he could never uncross. His breath came in ragged gasps as he realized the magnitude of what he had just done. Evelyn's face contorted with pain, but she managed to lift her head, her eyes locking onto Jason's with a look of unwavering strength. "You shot me," she said, her voice twisted with pain but strong. "An army colonel. For what? Because I was helping a child? Jason's breath caught in his throat, but no words came. He stood frozen, incapable of offering any explanation, any justification. He couldn't find an answer, only the realization of his irreversible mistake. The crowd, which had stood in stunned silence, was now seething with anger. People shouted at Jason, their voices a chorus of fury and disbelief. The sirens grew louder, approaching fast, but the damage was already done. Max, still in shock, clung to Evelyn's side, his little body trembling as he sobbed uncontrollably. He had lost his sense of safety, his world shattered in an instant by the violence that had erupted around him. Evelyn could barely hold on, her vision fading as the pain intensified. But even through the pain, her heart burned with anger, not just for the wound that had been inflicted on her body, but for the injustice she had endured. The courtroom was tense, the weight of the moment settling over everyone present. The elderly judge, her silver hair glistening under the bright lights, banged her gavel with authority, signaling the end of the trial. "Today's incident is not just about the actions of one individual," she began, her voice firm yet solemn. "It also reflects a broader problem, one of bias and inappropriate conduct in law enforcement." She glanced around the courtroom, where every eye was focused on her. After reviewing the evidence, including video footage and witness testimony, the judge continued, "I am sentencing Jason Miller to 10 years in prison for abuse of power, assault causing serious injury, and breach of professional ethics." A murmur rose in the courtroom. Some people lightly applauded, their faces filled with a sense of justice being served, while others nodded in agreement, grateful for the accountability that was being upheld. Jason, however, had no such satisfaction. His face was ashen, a look of regret clouding his features as he bowed his head. He muttered a few words of apology, but it was clear that nothing he said could undo the damage. Evelyn, however, did not respond. She remained silent, her gaze unwavering as she processed the verdict. The room fell into a quiet, uncomfortable stillness as the judge's gavel struck once more. As the trial ended and the courtroom emptied, reporters quickly surrounded Evelyn. Cameras flashed, capturing every moment as eager journalists clamored for her reaction. A young journalist stepped forward, holding a microphone up to Evelyn. "Miss Evelyn," she asked, "what do you think about this verdict, and what message do you want to send to the public?" Evelyn took a deep breath, her posture strong and calm despite the emotions that still simmered beneath the surface. She met the camera's lens directly, speaking with an authority that came from her years of service and the gravity of her experience. "I'm not happy that Jason is in prison," Evelyn began, her voice clear and measured. "I hope he uses this time to reflect and change, but more importantly, we can't let things like this continue to happen. We need better training for the police. We need to eliminate bias from the system, and we need to see people for who they are, not by the color of their skin or their status." Her words were powerful, resonating with truth as she addressed the systemic issues that had led to the tragedy. The camera shutter clicked repeatedly as reporters rushed to capture her every word, knowing the significance of this moment. Months passed after the trial, but the ripple effects of the incident continued to reverberate. Chief Roy, recognizing the need for change, implemented a series of reforms within his department. A new training program focused on bias awareness and handling sensitive situations was rolled out. Officers were required to keep their body cameras on at all times, ensuring transparency in their actions. Any abuse of authority would be severely punished, ensuring that those who wore the badge would do so with integrity. One autumn morning, Evelyn sat on the same park bench where it had all begun. The air was crisp, and the golden leaves of fall danced around her. The sounds of children playing and joggers passing by felt almost like a distant memory, but the weight of the past was still with her. Suddenly, a small figure appeared in the distance, running towards her with a bright smile on his face. It was Max. Holding a small bouquet of flowers, he approached Evelyn with excitement shining in his eyes. Behind him was his mother, a young woman with a gentle face. Her eyes filled. "With gratitude, Miss Evelyn," Max cried out, handing her the flowers. "Are you feeling better? I missed you so much." Evelyn's heart warmed at the sight of him. She smiled and took the flowers, pulling Max into her arms. "I'm much better thanks to you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're a brave boy, Max. I'm so proud of you." Max's mother sat down beside them. Her eyes filled with quiet appreciation as she gazed at Evelyn. "I can never thank you enough," she said softly, her voice full of gratitude. "You saved my son that day." Evelyn nodded, her eyes misting. Over. The journey had been long and painful, but moments like this, moments of healing, reminded her of the power of kindness and courage in the face of injustice. She didn't need recognition, but this was the reward. The joy of knowing that she had made a difference in the life of a young boy and in the world around her. The story comes full circle with Evelyn, once a victim of injustice, now witnessing the positive impact of her actions. Her bravery and resilience serve as a beacon of hope for change, and the reforms put in place represent a small but significant step toward a more equitable future. Let me know if you'd like to continue or make adjustments. Evelyn held the woman's hand tightly, her voice calm but filled with sincerity. "I don't know how to thank you," Max's mother said, her eyes welling up with gratitude. "Not only did you save Max, but you also helped us realize that there are things that need to change in the way we treat each other." Evelyn's heart warmed at the words. She gently squeezed the woman's hand. "We all have a responsibility to each other," she said, her eyes full of compassion. "The important thing is that we don't give up hope and always try to do better." Max, still clutching her hand, looked up at Evelyn with admiration. She smiled softly at him. "It's okay now, Max. You're safe, and that's what matters." Days later, Sheriff Roy Anderson stepped out of his patrol car and immediately recognized Evelyn. He had seen her at a ceremony honoring military officers, and now here she was in the park, where everything had begun. "Oh my God, Evelyn Carter!" Roy rushed over, his face etched with concern. He knelt beside her, looking at her wound with urgency. "Evelyn, are you okay? Who did this?" Evelyn turned her gaze toward Jason, still standing a short distance away, his hands trembling with fear. Her voice, although weak from the pain, was unwavering. "He shot me," she said firmly. "He didn't believe who I was, just because I didn't look like what he thought a military officer should look like." Roy's anger flared as he turned sharply toward Jason, his eyes full of fury. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded, his voice laced with disbelief. "Do you know who she is? This is Colonel Evelyn Carter, a national hero." Jason stood frozen, his face draining of color. I don't know," he stammered, but his words were drowned out by the protests and anger of the onlookers. Roy's patience had run out. Without another word, he ordered, "Handcuff him and call an ambulance immediately." Evelyn lay there on the ground, clutching her leg where the bullet had pierced through her thigh. The pain was sharp, but even more excruciating was the pain of injustice she had endured. She had spent her life serving her country, defending the values of freedom and equality, and now she was being attacked because of her skin, her appearance, because of who others thought she was. Max knelt beside her, his small face streaked with tears. "Are you okay, Miss Evelyn?" he asked, his voice full of worry. Evelyn managed a soft smile, despite the agony coursing through her body. "I'll be okay, Max," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're safe now, and that's all that matters." A paramedic rushed over, immediately working to stop the bleeding before carefully moving Evelyn onto a stretcher. As they lifted her, the crowd around her began to stir, some shouting, "She did nothing wrong," and "Justice will be served." The words of the crowd were a balm to her bruised spirit. Even in the face of injustice, there were those who stood up, those who believed. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, Evelyn felt like real change was within reach. And as the sirens wailed in the distance, she knew that what had started as a painful moment of misunderstanding could, and would lead to something bigger, something that could change the course of history. After the incident, news outlets covered the story extensively. The conversation around police training, bias, and racial profiling became a national discussion. Evelyn's courage had sparked a revolution in thought and action, and soon after, police departments across the country began to implement new training programs. Sheriff Roy and other officials began to emphasize fairness, sensitivity, and awareness in their daily practices, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. But it wasn't just a shift in law enforcement that occurred. The people, neighbors, friends, strangers, came together in a new wave of solidarity, inspired by Evelyn's bravery. Max's small act of reaching out for help, and Evelyn's steadfast resolve to help him, became the seeds of a larger movement of kindness, understanding, and justice. And so, the story ended not with a bitter taste of injustice, but with the sweetness of hope. A hope that the future would be brighter, fairer, and more united than ever before. The voices grew louder, like fuel being poured on a fire. He should be fired! A person like that doesn't deserve to be a police officer! The criticism continued to grow as Jason stood handcuffed, silently absorbing the anger that was now focused on him. His initial confidence and aggression had evaporated, replaced by confusion and fear. Roy, the police chief, turned to his officers, his eyes stern. "Check all the videos that the citizens recorded," he ordered. "I want to know every detail of what just happened." Roy walked closer to Evelyn, looking down at her with apologetic eyes. "Evelyn, I'm sorry," he said softly. "This is a terrible misunderstanding. I promise to clear things up and make sure justice is served." Evelyn smiled faintly, trying to suppress the pain. "Misunderstanding?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "A gun went off, Roy. This is not just a misunderstanding. This is prejudice, a systemic problem that we have ignored for too long. I am not the only one who has suffered from this." Roy bowed his head, unable to find the right words. As the ambulance sped away, Evelyn lay there, her face filled with worry. She was in not only physical pain, but also deep emotional pain. As a military officer, she had been through much more dangerous situations, but she had never felt so helpless as she did at this moment. The memory of the incident replayed over and over in her mind. Not only did Jason refuse to listen to her explanation, but he also used force as if she were a real threat. Why? Just because her skin color didn't match his image of a good person. At the hospital, Sheriff Roy appeared as Evelyn was being wheeled into the intensive care unit. He walked through the hospital hallways, his eyes filled with reproach and criticism. This wasn't just Jason's problem. It was a stain on the entire system he was responsible for. Evelyn lay in the bed, her right leg carefully bandaged. Though she looked tired, her eyes were sharp when she saw Roy enter. "Are you feeling better?" Roy asked softly. "A little better," Evelyn replied, her voice steady. "But Roy, this isn't just about me. You know that, right?" Her words were devoid of any personal resentment, but there was the sternness of someone who had seen too much injustice. Roy sighed, his gaze turning downward. "I know. We caught Jason, and I promised to do a fair investigation. But I need your help. You're a symbol now, Evelyn. This could be a catalyst for change." Evelyn gave a tired smile, her eyes filled with resolve. "If you really want change, Roy, don't just make promises. Take action. There needs to be justice, not just for me, but for everyone who has been wronged." Roy nodded, his expression filled with understanding. He knew Evelyn was right. His responsibility extended beyond dealing with Jason. It was about changing the system itself. Meanwhile, the incident at the park had gone viral on social media. Videos of the entire altercation were quickly shared, sparking a national conversation. Anger spread across the internet, with millions of people condemning Jason's actions and calling for police reform. Articles, photos, and videos highlighted the injustice, all focusing on the racial bias that had led to Evelyn's shooting. Journalists quickly jumped on board, and Evelyn's story became a major headline across multiple media outlets. Military hero shot due to racial bias. Will the system change? The painful truth about racism in policing was suddenly in the public eye. The incident didn't just stay in the park. It became a spark that ignited a nationwide discussion about injustice and prejudice in American society. Evelyn knew her story had now become more than just a personal trauma. It had become a movement, and now it was her time to use her voice, not only to fight for herself, but for all